think I've had the childhood of what is representative of India's resurgent, class of people, which is my parents were in the government. They are from one part of the country, which is Bihar, but posted in a very, distant part from Bihar, which is Kerala, which is where I grew up and spent the first 15 years of my life. And so like many, I would say hundreds and thousands, perhaps millions of Indians of our age who've had the benefit of modern education, we speak more than one language. I speak 3 languages, Malayalam very proudly being one of them. And I went to Kendriya Vidyalayas because we traveled a lot. And therefore, I know what good public education can do when structured well and of good quality. And then we moved to Delhi, like most children at the age of 15 do, for higher education. And then I, joined Lady Shri Ram College. I was always interested in economics, Mita, simply because, it had, I think, even at that stage, certain critical thinking aspect to it, which largely I think it was borrowed from math. Of course, I didn't know then that economics has become so much more math now. But at that stage, I think what appealed to me was the critical thinking aspect that economics brought to education. And from then on, and also being and trained at LSR, which I think has been at the forefront of a lot of feminist thinking for our generation out of this area, which is Delhi and around. Many of my classmates were from across the subcontinent. So I saw what strong women, what capable, talented women were thinking and how they were thinking of their future and their contribution to the family and society. So I think I've had the benefit of modern education, but being part of traditional societies, I think very grounded in the realities of our family structures and the way the societies are structured in this part of the world. I think the PhD route was really one that I was only motivated towards when I went for a master's to the Delhi School of Economics. Because that is perhaps the only place, maybe now things have changed, but I'm talking about 25 years back, where research as a career was for the first time seriously discussed. And the faculty were extremely motivating and very encouraging. And then I moved to New York University, where I did a PhD in economics. And frankly, it was only after my formal training was complete. Well, you never say training is complete, you're always learning, but my formal technical training was completed that I really got interested in India's development and growth. And of course, it coincided with our, beginning of a high growth phase. So coming back to India, then, everything sort of stars began to align, the motivations for what to research and what the potential of the country is. It's very real for us. It's not an abstract concept we read in the newspapers or in the books. So for us, you have to look around in India and you have enough motivations. So I think that in a nutshell has been the last 25 years of my life. Well, if you consider the fact that countries are really built by people, and which we, in economics, we call it human capital. So every country, a prerequisite, almost like a requirement for a country to grow is to have healthy, educated population. And I think that is why, if you look at any of the OECD countries today, I think some of their finest minds, and a very large number of economists are included in that, are actually spending all their time looking at health policies, education policies, labor policies. So it has to do with human capital of the country. And I think for the longest time in India, we have considered economics more from a macro perspective. So therefore the economics conversation or the common a narrative around what the economy is remains limited to macro indicators of GDP growth, inflation, fiscal deficit. And I think that becomes quite defeating in terms of trying to understand where are the innate strengths and weaknesses. So which we then subsequently we call them as structural characteristics of a country. Where is it coming from? And a lot of it is really micro in nature. I was trained by the great William Baumol, who, when he said this in the class, then I was quite surprised, but over time, I think he was so right, that growth is a micro concept. It happens in the household, it happens in the firm, it happens in specific industries. Growth is not macro alone. And that is what is fascinating. And health and education, I think, are very, very fundamental to growth of a country. This paper is not very new. In fact, we wrote it in 2013. And since then, it has only gotten updated and the results have become stronger. Well, first of all, it's important to know why such a transition happened. And once we made the transition from paper ballot to EVM, what was the impact? The study very clearly shows, because now proving causality in economics is always a very tricky job. But I think the way India staggered its rollout of EVM across different states, across different years, does econometrically allow us to parse out that relationship. So we are in a position to actually make a fairly strong causal relationship between introduction of EVM and the impact it had on voter fraud. And also, frankly, more representative democracy, what does it mean for development itself? So we were able to stretch it all the way to certain outcomes of development. Now, the results are very clear that, first of all, the ballot stuffing, the booth capturing of the nature that used to happen in many of our constituencies. And by the way, we are also in a position to say which constituencies were particularly prone to these, because the Election Commission does go in for repolling. Many elections are cancelled and we go in for, again, repolling or by-polls, etc. So we know that the EVMs reduced electoral fraud. In many cases, and the reason, by the way, you're able to do that is, EVMs, you can't just keep pressing for a candidate. There is a natural time gap between each person's poll. And that allows for a discretion, because paper ballot stuffing, is very indiscriminate, and we have evidence of very significant ballot stuffing and booth capturing that was happening in India. So the results show very strongly that these frauds did come down, but very, very importantly, it also tells us that it had a disproportionately higher impact in terms of making democracy more inclusive towards women, older citizens, scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, which means the vulnerable population whose votes were traditionally captured. So you disallowed the women, you disallowed the elderly, you disallowed certain segments of the population. Those were the votes that were captured earlier on. And as a result of introduction of EVM, you're seeing that their representation, this vulnerable category, their representation increased as a result of EVM. So first of all, technology is not indiscriminate in terms of the response it has. Our democracy has, in fact, become far more representative thanks to the EVM. So that's number one. Number two, we are also able to stretch that to see that now if a candidate has been elected who is more representative, what is the response on the development of public goods, for instance, provision of public goods, availability of electricity, new schools getting reopened, etc. And therefore, we believe that it has been a very good move. And sometimes it really bothers me when we have conversations on why we need to go back to paper ballots when we see problems emerge in the US. I don't think the US problem is one of EVM. They have other concerns, and the postal ballot is one of them. So I don't think in any way we should conflate and ever think of going back to the paper ballot in India. So we have started also looking at some of the admissions data across institutions in India, Smita, and there are lots of fascinating insights. A lot of it is common knowledge, I think. You know, when the girls do so well in 10th standard and the 12th standard exams, almost always on an average doing better than the boys. And then we see that by the time they go in for higher education, many of them drop out. So the labor force participation of women itself is a very large concern in India, because with growth, we have seen girls drop out. And that means we need to support them more. They're not dropping out of free will. They're dropping out because we value children as a society, traditional society. We like to have children and families and so on, but the cost of that is being disproportionately borne by young women. And this is across all fields. This is not limited to business or economics and so on. This is across all, the entire spectrum of labor markets. So that is one concern. We need to support the girls more. So have more gender sensitive or women sensitive policies in the labor market. That's number one. But I think from the economics profession, I think, the girls are doing very well. I think they need to carry on fighting this battle. In many ways, we are destined to fight this on our own, as well as try to push the state and our institutions around, which includes private sector, to support this fight within every institution. Many of us, and while we are in our mid 40s, but in every institution that we've had the benefit to be part of, you have to bring about that change. The view of making this a level playing field, or shattering the glass ceiling. I think there is a policy response required, and that is where a lot of us, our research is pushing for those changes. And in many ways, states and institutions are also responding. But you see, the broader societal responses and the changes that are required, that remains a battle which is being fought, I think, in every household and at every dinner table, where women are trying to, put their point across. Well, the good thing is that I think modern life, highly, nuclearizing family, urbanizing families in India, all happening at a very fast pace. It is very important for the boys or the men to also step up. And in many ways they are. But I think that battle, one shouldn't give up on. I think, the young girls, I think they do need many more role models. We are fortunate in India to have so many young women politicians, policymakers, leaders of institutions. And while they may still remain a minority, considering the entire sort of universe of this leadership set, but they are a growing number. And I think it's important to build on that and build the pipeline. So I think the trend is in the right direction.